Hi everybody, welcome to our webinar today. This is a webinar of Medianet in partnership with CoverageBook. I'm Hannah from CoverageBook. It's great to have you all here in the room today. There's loads of you on the webinar. So please send your questions in as we go, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So today's webinar is all about DIY versus ROI, the dangers of doing it yourself in a budget conscious time. And what we mean by that is we know that PR budgets are being reduced. There was some data that was released by Provoke recently. It was with the world's 100 most powerful communicators, and it found that budgets are actually been reduced by $1 billion from 4.8 billion to 3.7 billion. So it's a huge reduction. And at the same time, we're hearing that many PR professionals are experiencing burnout. And that they're being paid they're doing work that's not paid. They're doing unpaid work. So really now we're getting to a point where it's time to take action. We need to review workflows and look at the tools that we're using that can make us more efficient with our time, so we can go back and impress our stakeholders and our bosses with the work that we're doing and the investment that they're making in us. But the big question for today is doing it yourself the right answer? So today I'm joined by Amrita from Medianet and Stella from CoverageBook. So I'm going to pass on to you guys just to introduce yourselves. Amrita, would you like to go first?
Thank you so much, Hannah, for that great intro. And Stella, great to be talking to you. As always, I'm excited for this chat. Hi, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to attend our webinar today, whichever part of the world you are watching this from, because very exciting. We obviously have this in two time zones for this webinar. I'm Amrita Sidhu, and I am the Managing Director of Medianet. Medianet is a PR and media intelligence platform that helps brands connect with media and achieve earned media through the distribution of press releases, building effective relationships with media contacts, and then measuring the success of your PR campaign. And I have known Stella for a little while now, so pleasure to be talking to you, Stella.
And you, Amrita, it's great to see you. Amrita and I know each other through the work that we do with AMEC, which anyone who isn't aware of what AMEC is, it's the Association of Measurement and Evaluation for Communications. Rolls off the tongue. But yeah, they do some fantastic work. So make sure you check that organization out. So yes, thank you for the intro, guys. I'm Stella. I'm director and co-founder at CoverageBook. CoverageBook is a reporting tool, and it automates the process of pulling together coverage clips and putting together metrics and designing your reports in a sort of boardroom ready way, so you can share those reports with your clients. I've been in the PR industry over 20 years now. Started off in agencies, in PR, traditional PR agencies, then went into digital marketing agencies, and have been in more of the measurement space for the last 10 years. So really passionate about this topic and can't wait to get started.
Thanks, guys. It's so good to have you both here today. Anyone that's in the room today, if you have any questions for us as well, you can get in touch with us on Twitter. So CoverageBook, we are at CoverageBook, and the guys at Medianet are at Medianet Tweets. So yeah, please do get in touch with us on there. And if we don't have time to answer your question at the end of the session, we can do it over Twitter. I'm calling it Twitter. It's actually X now, isn't it? Formerly known as Twitter. I just don't know when that's going to go into my brain, but at some point it will do.
Yeah. Well, it shows you how long it takes, right, to have to change brand recognition once you've got a brand in market. So there's a bit of a PR lesson right there as well. Yeah.
Exactly. You can also find both companies on LinkedIn as well, and CoverageBook are on Facebook too. So any of those platforms would be great. So you probably saw some of the questions on the screen at the start there, but let's just dive straight into the first question. So the first question is, what has promoted this public relations squeeze that's being talked about globally right now? So yeah, I don't know who wants to go first for that question.
I'll go first. So yeah, I mean, Hannah did a good sort of like touch on one of the stats that have been in the industry recently. And I think if you read any PR industry media, you will see this in the news. But one which really took our attention was from Provoke, which is a global PR media platform. And they do an annual piece of research with the 100 most powerful communicators in the world. So people who are managing PR budgets for all of the huge brands that we know. And yeah, they all reported that there had been a reduction in budgets of, and in total it was over $1 billion, $1 billion. Yeah. So that's huge. And it's not just of the big brands either. We work with all sorts of shapes and sizes of businesses and agencies, and we're hearing that as well, that there has been a reduction. Equally, it's not just PR. I did a recent interview with an agency CFO who works with marketing agencies across the board, and actually it's a marketing issue. And so all of marketing budgets are being squeezed, and also there's a lot of pressure on marketing directors to really prove an ROI on any budget they're spending. Now, we know that that can be quite tough for PR, which is why we wanted to do this webinar. Amrita, what have you feeling with this? What have you heard?
Yeah, so such a good question. And that data you shared at the start, Hannah, and you just emphasized there, so it's pretty scary, right? That's like 25% budget reduction in this, what I feel is a very important industry. And you know, we're talking about this, so we feel passionately about this. I'm sure those that are watching and a part of this are feeling equally passionate. And I feel like there's a few layers to this, right? There's the economic factors, there's data challenges, and then there's the visibility of PR, communications, marketing, you know, within an organization. The economic factors, I think the reality is budgets are being challenged across the board at the moment, and that's undeniable. That is a result of, what's happened in the last couple of years. But as your data shows, perhaps more so in the PR and communication space than perhaps in other parts of an organization. And part of the driver, I feel personally, about that is the lack of consistent understanding on how to measure the success of PR campaigns, which data to use, how to analyze it effectively, and then probably most importantly, how to package it up in a way that's impactful and meaningful and digestible for those really important internal powers that we all, have accountability towards. And that kind of leads to my visibility layer, or my visibility kind of reasoning behind this. And I feel we're great in our industry PRing for our brand, or from the agency side, as you've been, Stella, PRing for our clients. But how much PRing do we do internally about our own function and what we've achieved? Should we be doing more about it? Because I feel sometimes we're not as great as we could be with our own PRing of ourselves.
And just to add as well, it can feel, when we are surrounded by budgets are being reduced, they're getting tighter, it can feel quite hard and going into our jobs every day. But there is an opportunity as well. We actually did some research in about 2 months ago, where we researched PR people in agencies, but also budget holders in-house as well. And budget holders in-house said there was 91%, so nearly everyone we surveyed in-house said they would invest more budget with their agencies if they felt more confidence in their data ability. And that really came down to metrics. So it really backs up your point. So there is an opportunity here. We can get some more.
Yeah, fantastic.
That's great to hear, guys. So going back to the title of this actual webinar today, what is it that we're meaning when we're saying kind of do it yourself, the DIY versus the ROI? What does that mean?
I'll go. Yeah. Well, the PR workflow is broad and it grows all of the time. I mentioned at the beginning that I've been in PR a long time. 2003 was when I first started, and I would say the workflow was a lot simpler then, and it was quite straightforward. We did just do some planning, and I guess content was there, but it was in the form of just a press release. And then we reached out to a handful of journalists because there was a handful of media, and then that was it. Then we reported. Obviously now the landscape is vast. There are all sorts of different media platforms. Everybody on social is now a publisher, so there's all sorts of different types of influencers. And then that's just from like a normal media relations or influencer relations point of view. There's of course different lines of activity and content that move into other areas of marketing now as well. So there's a lot of crossover, which means that there is a lot of crossover of budget as well. But sticking to the point of do it yourself, obviously at each point of a workflow, you can see there we've got a very sort of brief timeline, if you like, of a workflow. There's many different jobs that can fall into that workflow, and it's only going to set to increase as communication increases and technology increases. So if we were going to do it yourself with every part of this workflow, it just wouldn't be possible. Now, thankfully, technology develops, and we do have the use of tools to help us at different areas and different points of this workflow. We can use a tool like Medianet to find the right kind of journalists. We can use different tools to create content quicker. And what we're saying is make the most of that. What can you really review your workflow regularly? Because if you can automate any areas, you can really save time. And if your budget is being squeezed, let's think about how we spend that budget internally, because we can't, if our budget holders and our clients make that decision that the budget has to be cut, there's not much we can do about it at that point of the decision. We are going to come on to how you can try and stop that happening later on in the webinar, but at that moment you can't do anything. What you can do is manage the budget once it comes through to you and make the most of it, because time is money. We're going to come on to that as well. But if you can automate any area of your work, you're banking that fee time. So really make the most of the budgets that you have and really review that workflow.
We've actually got some people in the room that are asking already about what those tools are. They're keen, guys. I think we're going to come on to that later on in the webinar, aren't we? So yes, we will be. Get ready to do a kind of screenshot at that point, because we will be sharing some of the best tools that we find to help with that workflow.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Great to hear the interest on that. Firstly, I hope everyone is not seeing the weird green thing around me, because I can see it in my view here, and I hope it's just something to do with my camera, and everyone is seeing not this weird glow, but I'm not in like some alien place, I promise. So what does DIY mean for me? I think personally, it's when I try and hang paintings in my house and I can never get them straight. But professionally, for the business world, agency world, for me, it's that feeling that we have, that kind of subconscious thought that probably goes through our head every day, maybe multiple times a day. Oh, I'll just do it myself. It's just easier that way. Or it's when we feel it's too hard to delegate or to find the right partner to work with. Or you say to your colleague, oh, Stella, I'm sure there's a better way of doing this. And there's got to be a platform out there that solves this. But where do I even start finding it? Like, how am I even going to get it, work out what to use? To me, and then you just end up doing it yourself, right? Because it's easier and easier means many different things to different people. But in that moment where we make that conscious or that subconscious decision to do any part of that workflow that Stella outlined, which, I'm sure has expanded a lot in your 20 plus years in this space, what we forget to think about or ask ourselves properly, I feel, is at what cost of you doing that task yourself? What other work have you pushed aside to make that happen? What extra hours are you doing yourself, or are you putting on your teams and on your business? You shared a great data point, Stella, from a survey that you had just done recently, and from Medianet's 2023 Media Landscape Report, where we surveyed, about 1,000 journalists and 300 PR professionals. What we found is that 66% of them, so 2/3, had experienced burnout in their professional work. 84% of them are doing some kind of unpaid work every week. And many PR professionals in the results discussed, in the open kind of responses, discussed the challenge of having to be constantly on for their clients, for the media, and, for partners and for agencies and stuff. And all of that expectation can be so hard to manage. So guys, with time poor enough as it is, and, doing it yourself, or, manually every part of the PR and communications workflow, I think that's a big challenge. And yeah, I'm excited to be talking about some of the tooling or some of the solutions that could be available for brands or agencies to use instead.
That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing those stats, Amrita. I've also got a PR background myself, and I can 100% relate to all of those numbers. So yeah, I guess the next question then, leading on from this, is we talked about kind of taking action before your budgets are being reduced. So how do you do this if you get that kind of feeling that you could be at risk of that happening to you and your team? What can you do to prevent it?
Yeah, I might go first on this one, Stella, if that's okay. And I feel like I might sound a bit like a broken record on what I said earlier, but I think it comes down to visibility and data, and building this strong internal profile for the PR, comms, brand kind of functions, and really showcasing the importance of continued maintained investment in that function. And investment is people, technology, just time at the table, prominence, all of these are different kinds of investment that have budgets attached to it. And using that data to show the insights and the impact of the work, and to do it in a measurable way, because, a budget number is something that's measurable, and we need to counter that with something else that's measurable. Not just, oh, boss, trust me, like we need another £10,000 or, $20,000, and then not being able to show the value against that as well. So what do you think, Stella?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I mentioned already, I'd recently interviewed a chief finance officer who has 30 years experience in working with agencies. His name's Simon Collard, and it's on my podcast. Cheeky plug there for my podcast. But it was fascinating. Yeah. Well, that last episode, it really does fit with what we're talking about because of what's going on in the industry. He actually said something that really, really caught my attention. And he obviously doesn't do the PR or marketing work. He's an expert in finances and looking after the finances. But he said, if you can't demonstrate how your work solves a problem for your client, then your budget could be in trouble. And that really, really stuck with me, because now we know that PR, earned media, is really, really a challenge in comparison to other areas of marketing to get to a value, to get to a dollar sign, to get to a pound sign. We know that whenever we're at conferences, it's always like, how can you prove value? And there are all sorts of ways that you can prove earned media value, whether it's through changes of opinion, and getting people on board with your key messages. But when it comes to budgets, they really need to see that return, and that is something that we're going to have to do. And I know that it's not all about that with PR. We can't just say, well, it's all about the dollar sign. You have to talk about the strength in messaging and how we bring the public with us and get them involved in our messages. But you need to do both. You need to show the value of communications, but you also do have to try and get to some kind of finance value, because there's so much pressure on marketing directors now. So without going into too much detail, there are some ways of doing this, and we could probably do a whole other webinar just on trying to get to financial value with metrics. But I wanted to just use one as an example, because it's something that some of our customers at CoverageBook have been doing. Now, I just want to say this isn't in CoverageBook, so don't worry, I'm not doing a big plug for the tool, but there is a metric within CoverageBook that we use, which is estimated coverage views. So rather than looking at the total traffic of a website that you've got your coverage on, what we do is try and be a bit more realistic about how many people may have seen that. And it's and we work that out by looking at the total traffic and where your coverage is placed. Now, with that metric, something that a lot of our customers do, and actually this is something that came from one of our customers, Diageo, the big global drinks brands, which has got Smirnoff and Guinness, etc. They did this, and we were like, that's really, really interesting. And it actually came from one of their marketing directors, because he had the challenge, which we've been talking about, where he managed all the marketing agencies, so ad agencies, digital agencies, PR agencies, and he knew the value of PR was very different to advertising, but he really just needed something to have so he could compare apples to apples when he gets to deciding where the budget goes to. So something he did was look at estimated views as a proxy for impressions. Now, impressions is the metric that all other areas of marketing uses. So whether it's how many times your piece of social content gets viewed or how many times your ad gets viewed, it's a common metric. So estimated views and impressions, the same. So what he was doing was working out, again, it's a common metric in advertising, which is CPM, and it's cost per 1,000 views. And what he was doing was looking at the total cost of your PR campaign and then dividing it by the total impressions, which could be the estimated views of all of your coverage of your campaign, and then getting to a cost per 1,000 impressions amount, which, if you look at this example, and don't worry, guys, we can share this afterwards because I know that it's quite detailed on the screen, or take a screenshot right now. But it gave him an opportunity to have earned media, and he had a CPM for earned media there, and he had a CPM for his paid media and his owned media. And yes, he also had many other metrics underneath that, which was all about PR and all about advertising and all about the content, but it just gave him something to be able to evaluate. And actually, the great point is, which is why we always want to share this one, is because earned media always came out best. So they ended up getting more budget. So yeah, just wanted to share that one as one option of something you could do.
That's a great share, Stella. Thank you. I took a screenshot sneakily while you were talking as well anyway, because I want this slide coming my way too. That's a great tip. Great share. And, it's just nice to have somewhere to start this discussion, right? And then kind of customize it as need be for your kind of business metric. I was talking there earlier about using data to combat data or to get data in here, financial data, budget data. So this is great. To go with something like this as a starting point is fantastic.
Thanks so much, guys. We've actually had a few people asking about the resources. So people have mentioned the podcast, more info on cost, CPM, and also for the research that you did, Amrita, as well. So we'll get together all those resources and share them with you guys along with the webinar recording. So on to the next question. You're there, okay? You've decided that you need to look at your tool stack, but obviously it's a bit of a challenging conversation to have with, your boss, your client, your stakeholder, because you're actually asking for extra investment to bring down the overall costs and make you be able to spend their time better. How do you actually go about pitching that investment to that stakeholder? What's the approach there?
Yeah, I might start with this one only because we've just recently finalised our financial year budgets. Well, not too long ago, we started a new financial year in Australia here on 1 July. So I had a lot of recent experience pitching about budgets to the people that matter, because yes, our bosses do scrutinise costs, and like I said earlier, probably under the current economic conditions, more so now than ever, than certainly in my kind of working experience. So I'm a big believer in building a business case that helps make that decision, that investment in that new platform, a bit of a no-brainer. And we actually do this a lot at Medianet ourselves, and we try and follow a relatively simple process around that. So I just kind of wanted to share that again as a bit of a tip to those watching, because it's pretty simple and straightforward. For example, if our marketing team wanted to invest in a new lead generation platform, a new lead generation tool to add automation and volume into what we're doing lead generation wise, first thing we do after we understand current state is to look at what success metrics we're targeting and how we're going to measure that, right? So success and how we're going to measure. Then we would look to build out a small proof of concept to demonstrate how that particular tool, our tool of choice, our platform of choice, how that works and the impact it has, both measurable and non-measurable. Now, many platforms, tools, software, we all know this, they either offer free trial or they have like an entry-level plan that's generally, you know, low cost. You can sign up for a month or something like that. So that's, in my experience, enough for us to test with and build out that proof of concept. And then the final piece of that business case, and perhaps the most important one, is you need to layer in what your team would seek to do, achieve, with the time they're going to get back by using this lead generation software that's going to ramp up the amount of leads marketing is delivering. What are they going to do? And yes, bosses will love it if you can show with that time saved, with those hours recovered, if you can relate them back to other revenue generating or cost optimization activities, because that's going to directly address, you know, the budget offset. So when you have all of this together, you can really build a bit of a compelling story on how the new cost can actually lead to success, not just in that particular area, but perhaps have a flow-on success, financial success to another part. And I briefly wanted to demonstrate this through a bit of a client data case study that we are working on at Medianet. One of the biggest challenges that we hear all the time from our clients in creating a PR campaign, and more than 50% of clients, 50-60% of clients would tell me this, is that 50% of the media are changing all the time. So it's really hard to find the right journalist contact, the right media contact to work with. And our data supports that. That survey I mentioned also showed that almost 50% of journalists changed roles in the last year. So based on the clients that I speak to, both our corporate and agency client, they say if they had to do it themselves, if they had to update the contact information or where someone was working themselves, say to take about 15 minutes a contact to do that. And based on the average salary in Australia, anyway, of a junior comms marketing exec type role, that extrapolates out to about $50 per contact being updated. And if you only updated 20 contacts a month, you all can do the maths. That's about 1,000 Australian dollars, say, in time spent, by you and your team. And if you could access a media contacts tool or some other kind of database for less than half of that time spent, aren't you able to use those hours so much more effectively to produce better content, to build more effective media relationships, and to better measure, you know, your PR? So to me, that's like really strong data there that supports build a business case, put a value on your time being spent in DIY, and use that to pitch to your boss.
And that's just one area of that PR workflow.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that is so much time and money. And when you think about that whole line, I mean, I'd just love to follow on. It's quite astounding, isn't it? The amount of time and money that's just in that one spot. So that's updating contacts, researching contacts. Well, I would like to move along to skip a couple of areas of the workflow and move down to the reporting side. And I just wanted to talk through an example as well. We actually had a customer, I don't think they'll mind me saying it. It was a department in the Edelman agency. And it was really interesting that they actually had a workflow week, which I think is a really good idea and a recommendation to other teams. I wish that we had done it in our team a few years ago. Now, what they did is take a week out of every year, and they tried to minimize client work as much as they could just to do this sort of big review week. Obviously, client work can never stop, but they made sure that they dedicated time and they went through their whole workflow. So similarly to what shows on that timeline, from planning right through to evaluation, and they looked at every tool that they were using and maybe not using. And because there's always new tech coming up, isn't there? There's always new tech you could be looking at. We're going to share even more at the end of this, but they wanted to do that review. And so everybody was, the team was split up and they were set different areas of the workflow to research and review. And we know about the reporting part because that's when they decided to do a free trial with CoverageBook. Now, previous to using CoverageBook, they were creating global reports manually. So that's the collecting clips, pulling in metrics. And when I say global reports, they were working with other teams in other markets. So they were pulling together all of that coverage. So quite a substantial coverage book. Now, when they tested CoverageBook, the tool, they found that they really did cut down on time. So their reports were originally taking them around 60 minutes per report. And 5 hours, very different. Each report was taking them 5 hours, and they managed to cut that down to just 60 minutes. Now, when they really looked at whether they should invest in CoverageBook, they were like, they can't believe how much time that freed up for them as a team. But then when they really worked out like how much that would be of their fee time, it was astounding, really. Because the investment that they were making into the tool was £229 a month. So when they compared that to the saving, they were saving almost, it was $1,771 a month in their budgets, in their client budgets, which they sort of banked some of that because they've got that time saved. But importantly, most of that time was then used again. So Amrita, you made this point, like, what are you doing with that saved time? So rather than talented PR practitioners copying and pasting, taking screen grabs, researching different total traffic for different publishers, which isn't the best use of their talents. It's, that's a manual, very admin heavy job. They were actually using their talents in a much better way, and they started to really develop their digital PR offering. And I know that department then started to win much bigger budgets because they started to learn about SEO and other areas of digital marketing. So that's what they were doing with their saved time. And of course, yes, they saved that money too. So it really, we've just talked about two areas of a workflow. Imagine if you did look at every single area, you're talking about a lot of time and a lot of fee.
Yeah, I think the cost saving, obviously, that's the thing that you're going to be pitching to your boss, isn't it? But for you personally as a professional, it's going to make your life so much better and make you get more out of your job and put you in a better place in your career if you can actually spend more time on doing the things that are going to be good for your clients or your internal teams and actually move you on personally as well. It's all about making life better here too.
Yeah, I love that point, Hannah. Actually, I really do. And Stella, thank you for raising that, because isn't there a hidden cost as well to staff engagement and to moving staff further up the value chain? And we all know when we lose a valuable staff member because perhaps they're not getting the same level of satisfaction out of their role and they've found something else, there's a big business cost to that as well. So I really love that point that you both made there. I think very helpful for everyone listening to keep that in mind too.
Great. Okay, then. So on to the last question. This is the one that everyone's been asking about. So what tools is it that you guys recommend? What would be your tool stack, or what kind of tools are you looking at to put in your workflow to make those cost savings and make life better as a PR professional?
I go first.
Go for
what
it.
I would say about
your recommendations, actually.
What I would say is that it can be quite overwhelming, actually, this area. And I know that I used to feel quite overwhelmed until somebody said to me, be aware of new tools, starting and launching. But be aware not to switch and jump around and have that magpie effect of like, oh, shiny new tool, I must use it, I must go over here. Because what can happen, it can be quite damaging to switch too many times. So once you find your tool stack, try and stick with it for a while. One reason why I would recommend that is because they work in different ways. And if you're switching up your workflow or switching up the metrics that you use, you won't have consistency in the way that you work. And you might, even an example is there's many different ways that a publisher can report on how much traffic that they get in a month. And then any tool that then reports on that can use different data sets of that. So even just a very simple number of how much traffic a publisher gets could really change with the different tools that you're using. And none of them are bad. It's just that they're different. It could be uniques. It could be visitors. So, something like that. So try not to switch around too much, but it's also still really important to be aware of the new tools that are starting, because they could, as we've already said, they could really save you time and bring a lot of value. Also, it would be silly of us not to mention ChatGPT on this. Obviously, that's been talked about a lot in different PR forums and on different sites. That is a way that lots of people are trying to save time. What I would say with that is that we've tested a few different ways. So, whether we're getting it to pull together contacts or if we're getting it to write something, obviously it's AI. It still needs a lot of help and a lot of human touch and human elements. So just, again, be aware of what's going on in the industry, but also be aware that you're not throwing everything at it. There's some really good established tools. So if we can have a quick look, we did pull together some of our favorites. So going back to the timeline on the PR workflow of planning, content, engagement, tracking, measurement, evaluation. I mean, this really, we could have thousands of logos underneath here. But some of our favorites in terms of actually saving time, we've got some here. So starting right at the top with planning, really simply, Calendly, it might be an obvious one, but my goodness, that takes a lot of time trying to find the right time for everyone to meet up, to talk about a webinar or to talk about some content to be created. It just saves so much time. Again, with any kind of project planning as well, Scoro is a really good project planner, communication project planners, Slack, Basecamp. These might be tools that you're using already, but they make such a big difference when you test one of them and then really do change your workflow. So for example, Basecamp is something that we use within the CoverageBook team. We don't use email. The only time we use email is if somebody externally emails us, and we check those once a day. Everything else is in Basecamp, and it's an amazing project management tool. All of your documents are in there. And I know, again, I wish that we had that when we were working on PR campaigns together. I don't know how much time we've got to go through, but you'll recognize some of these. Canva, great. I don't need a designer anymore. Well, I do for some things, but need to quickly. Hannah's probably thinking, yes.
Yeah, I'm like.
But you used to be that just for a very simple slide, to make a slide look good, you would have to have a designer. You can quickly do things now with these tools. Descript, again, is like a great video. A video editing platform. Really does save a lot of time. HubSpot is a really big platform, quite an expensive one, but it depends if you're doing a lot of inbound marketing. That can be really good there. I won't try and talk about Medianet and its benefits. Amrita, you can tell us a little bit more about the different elements, because you actually cover quite a few areas on the workflow here, don't you, within Medianet?
Yeah, we do. It's got planning elements that certainly help you at the start of your PR workflow journey, and then driving that engagement with our media contacts and our journalists. And then, yes, like CoverageBook, but in a different way, helping measure the success of that campaign. So, yeah, you've got some great recommendations up here, Stella, a number of which Medianet also uses internally, and, we use ourselves. So, great to have your kind of 20 plus years of recommendations up here. That's fantastic. And I made a little note of one or two of them to look into in a bit more detail as well.
Yeah, I just want to cover a couple more towards the end, if that's okay, just in terms of the time save, because obviously there are a lot of different technology platforms now which bring value, but they might not save that time. So I just really wanted to only include ones that save time. So SEMrush at the top might not be one that you've heard of, but if you are moving into that space of looking at how your PR work is affecting Google search, for example, it can be a really manual process to actually try and manually track how Google search looks different if you are looking for whether your content is appearing in Google search, or how people might be searching for your brand name, for example. SEMrush will just automate all of that. So it might not be an area you're working in, and that's fine. But if it is, don't do it manually. Use a tool. And there's all sorts of different pricing options with that. And then Google Data Studio is an interesting one. If you're really getting into the evaluation side of things and you're trying to, and good luck to you if you're doing this, because it's amazing, but if you're getting into building graphs of looking at different key messages changing, or your coverage over time, and really getting into that evaluation piece at the end of the year, doing that within Sheets or Excel and playing with pivot tables can be a lot. Now, you do still need to do an element of that with Google Data Studio, but it does actually pull everything together into like almost a dashboard, which can be a little bit quicker. SimilarWeb is a great one, and they again have different levels of investment. So what this will do, and this is actually quite handy when you can't get access to data from some of your clients, which I know can be difficult. So if you want to know how much traffic your client's website might have got when you had a peak of a campaign, they might say, no, we're not going to share that kind of information, which I know can be a challenge sometimes. SimilarWeb actually looks and it does estimate it sometimes, but it's really accurate. We've done some tests with it. It looks at traffic that all websites are getting, so it's a really good one. There's a free element to it that you can test with, but then you can pay as well. And then there's lots of the I've included there in the middle of tracking. There's a real range of different monitoring, so many different monitoring tools, but yeah, there's a different range there. And of course, we've got CoverageBook in there, which I mentioned right at the beginning, will cut down that manual task of going to get your screenshots of coverage and then pulling in metrics and designing it. We automate all of that, and it just cuts it down into a few minutes of a job.
And I can absolutely vouch for it being a few minutes of a job, Stella, because our head of operations at Medianet, just signed up herself. Great sign up process, by the way. I'm a big believer in fantastic user experience, and had a bit of a play around and created something in a couple of minutes and shared it around. So, that was, completely with, no directive scope attached. So it was fantastic just to see the art of the possible there. So I will absolutely back what you're saying there. I don't think I have too much more to add to this question, Hannah, because I think Stella absolutely nailed it with her recommendations. And said I took a sneaky note of one or two of the things that you were saying there, but I was listening, I promise. I think the most important call out for me in this conversation is kind of what you touched on right at the start, is not to invest in too many tools or too many platforms. Finding one that integrates well with your current technology is important, because there's always that hidden cost integration, isn't there, that we also then don't kind of factor in. And it's okay, I feel, if it just addresses one part of that workflow that you can see up here on the screen, like that's still a good starting point to get efficiency, save, or optimization in one spot as a starting point. Get recommendations from trusted people in your network or colleagues, and Stella's just given us a great bunch here. And as I mentioned, the user experience is very important for me. Ultimately, though, I heard a great saying once, Stella, and this is what I'll probably wrap up with, is are you selecting and customizing your tech to suit your business process? Or are you prepared to be innovative and do something differently and adjust your business process to make the most out of the tech and its capabilities? And businesses can lie on either side of that, and that's absolutely okay, but know what you're investing in and why. And that will probably be my kind of last point on this.
I think it's a great closing point, actually.
Thank you.
You need the time to go and have a look at it to actually get the benefit. Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks so much, guys. We're actually running quite short on time, so we've only got time for a few questions. We've had loads through and we will get back to you all, but I've just picked out a few here. So the first one, and I guess this one would be best for Stella to answer first, is what metrics are best to track?
Yes, get asked this one a lot. And there are many, many metrics, and it totally depends on what your activity is and what your objective is. I have to say, you have to start with what your objective is first and what problem you are solving for your client's organization. However, in line with the topic that we've been talking about, clear metrics are always important, and realistic metrics. We don't want meaningless ones. And when I'm talking about that is, and I touched on this earlier, there's always been sort of a common theme of PR people to present their coverage and then just look at the total traffic that website gets. And what I would say is just every metric that you have in a report or you're about to send to your client, just stop and think, so what? So what does this metric say? And using total traffic as a total publisher traffic as an example doesn't say a lot about the work that you've done. All it says is how popular that site is, totally, but it doesn't say anything about your coverage, where it was, who saw it, what those readers might do next. So that's why we worked really hard in coming up with a formula for estimated views. But even if you can't get to an estimated views, I would just have the total traffic as context, but then really hone in on how many engagements did that article have, or what happened next. Did they go through to the website, or did traffic go up, or could you look at Google Trends to see to see whether brand searches went up at the same time as your coverage? So always just ask yourself, so what? And then look to see what other metrics you can do, because what we want to move away from as an industry, if we really are competing against other areas of marketing, which we know have access to more accurate metrics sometimes than us, is that we need to be as realistic and accurate as possible. And using big, giant, meaningless numbers is not going to help us. And I think that's the same of added together reach numbers as well. You know, if you're just adding up total traffic of all of those publisher websites and just having that as one big number, what does that say about your campaign or the value you're bringing to that business? It doesn't say a lot. So yeah, just really try and be realistic is what I'm saying, and credible.
I would also add to that as well, like thinking further than the metrics as well, is about how you're presenting the story of the success of that campaign or piece of work back to your stakeholders. So, you know, don't just having the numbers there and thinking about the numbers is great, but also, telling the story about that piece of work. We've just launched a new feature actually last week within CoverageBook called Slide Builder, and it enables you to tell that story within your coverage book. So from the start, what was it that you were setting out to try and achieve? How did you do it? What were you going to track? What the results were? And then go on to the numbers with the coverage in there as well. So that if you've got a busy report reader that doesn't have much time, and you know they're looking at so many different things, they may even have kind of forgotten exactly what it was that you guys were doing, that they've got it all there, and then they can see the value just in one report that they can look at kind of very quickly. I've actually got blog posts on that, so I can share that with the resources after the session too, if that'd be useful to people.
Cool.
Cool. Okay. Another question. This one would be great for Amrita to answer. So a few people actually have answered, do journalists prefer phone calls, social, or email? What's the best approach here?
Oh, I love this question too, and I'll try and be brief because I know we're running short of time here, and see if we can sneak in another question after this. So we'll leave it at this. I have the privilege in my role to talk to a lot of journalists, sort of meet them at events, and we do a lot of surveys and things like that. And it's really interesting because the press release is still used by 93% of journalists in Australia as a source for media. So it does have a place. And everything I hear from those journalists when they get asked this question at the events that I attend, they say, email me, be in my inbox, email me. And isn't there a thing, some good old marketing top of the funnel stuff that brands need to be doing, just being in the inbox of the journos? Now, quite often you won't hear anything from them, and that's pretty standard as well, because I can hear those people saying, that's fine, Amrita, but they don't reply to my email. And you know what? Yeah, they won't. But sometimes when they're looking for a source, say around some new environmental technology, they'll go to their inbox and they search. And if your release is coming up a few times, they're much more likely to then proactively reach out to you. And again, I hear this from journos across print, online and broadcast media. The other thing I would say, an increasingly important way to connect with the journos is on social. So we are seeing massive adoption of social as a source for stories in the Australian media market. And over 76% of journalists are actively scouring social media for stories. So be on the platform that they're on and find a way to kind of pitch and build connections with them on social. But yep, the email has not died and the press release has not died. In fact, they are probably more important than ever. Noting that you guys don't use emails internally though, and only for external things. So yeah.
Great. Thanks so much, Amrita. That's really helpful. We have got time for one last question, and I'll pick out this one. Is it possible to get to financial value in PR measurement? And if so, how? Who would like to answer that one?
Stella.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the golden question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we have sort of touched on this a little bit, and it's raised at nearly every conference that we go to, especially the ones that Amrita and I go to, and Hannah was at the last one as well, which is the AMEC conference, which is in Miami this year, which is always looking at the evaluation of earned media and communications. It's tough. It's not the same as other areas of marketing. And if you only talk about a $sign or a £, then the question is, are you talking about the value of communication? Now, the answer needs to be that we need to do both, because we can't just keep banging the drum of, yeah, but we got our key messages known and embedded within our audience, and now they love this brand, and 60% more people love the brand. That's great, but it's not going to keep our budgets. And as we've already talked about, the squeeze is on the budget holder, the marketing director, and yes, they can pass on our great key message improvements or audience change. But at the end of the day, the financial directors, the chief finance officers are looking at a profit and loss sheet, and they need to see where improvements are being made there. So it is important to try and get to it. So getting to the answer, there are a couple of different ways. Again, it does depend on what problem you are solving for your organization. If you are driving traffic to a website and that website happens to sell things, absolutely look at how you are affecting that. So different ways that you could do this is looking at your activity over the course of a year. So something that we help some of our customers do is look at graphing their coverage over time. And so looking at the peaks of coverage in a year, for example, at the end of the year, looking to see where it peaked. So it might have been across a summer campaign or something, and then correlating that to some business and organizational points. So what could be your second line of impact that you can show correlation to your PR effects? So different things that you could do is, if you can get hold of any kind of sales data from your client, show them what you're trying to achieve. Because if you just ask, they say, no, we can't share that kind of information. If you go to them with a graph of your campaigns, your coverage or your mentions, for example, and say, look, I'd love to put this second impact line here, and it's going to help up you internally as well, then they're more likely to say yes. If they really say no and don't share any sales data, there are some things that you can do. You could look at stock price change as well. You could look at traffic being sent to the websites by something like SimilarWeb, for example. And that's ways that you could do it by even, it's just a good conversation starter, because if you can see a correlation of, yeah, there was a peak of coverage in the campaign in June, and then there was a peak of traffic going to the website. If you're presenting that to your client and say, wouldn't it be great if we could overlay some sales data with this? And then they're more likely to say, yeah, okay, let's work together on that. Here's the sales data. And you can either put it into the graph or just check to see. Now, if you do ever get access to analytics, that's the absolute joy and the golden gate to great evaluation. And there's ways there you can look at goals, so you can look at what the traffic did and whether they made a sale or not. That's probably the best route. There are other options as well, but this would be another webinar, but I'm just going to mention it because if you wanted to research it, you could. An area of marketing that Hannah and I used to work in was SEO and PR together, also known as digital PR. That was the same kind of PR activity, except we were looking at how the PR activity affected the website position on Google search results. Now, the difference with that, again, is if the website sells products or sells us something on that website, the higher visibility it has in Google, the more it sells. So we were able to say that we affected that through PR. It takes a lot of learning, and it's a whole new area that you might want to go into, but it's a growing area in PR, and it is definitely an amazing way to prove financial value. So maybe that could be our follow-up. Our follow-up webinar, but yeah, it's another way you can get to $1.
Basically what Stella said. If I could pull up a post-it note and move it in here, I would be like, what Stella said. You nailed it. That was fantastic. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. That is all we've got time for today. We have slightly overrun, but it was definitely worth overrunning for you guys sharing that extra wisdom. So really appreciate having you both here today. And thank you to everybody that's joined the webinar. It's great to see so many people from so many different countries. We will respond to any questions that you have that we didn't get time to answer today. So just either get us on Twitter. So as a reminder, we are at CoverageBook, and the guys at Medianet are at Medianet. X. I keep saying Twitter, don't I? It's not going to go in. X. To be honest, I think pretty much everyone's still calling it Twitter.
They do.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah, the guys at Medianet are at Medianet Tweets as well. You can find us on LinkedIn, and you can find us on Facebook too. So yeah, we're also going to be sharing the recording along with any resources as well. So look out for that in your inbox. And yeah, finally, once again, a massive thank you to Stella and Amrita. And who knows, maybe we will do that follow-up podcast webinar at some point in the future.
Would love to. Thank you. Thank you, Stella. Thank you, Hannah. Really enjoyable conversation.
Same. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thanks for joining.
Amrita.
Cheers. Bye-bye.